A man stands in a field outside Nanjing, hands tied behind his back. He is not a soldier. He is not armed. He is simply a man who was in the wrong city when the wrong army arrived. The Japanese officer behind him raises a sword, a blade he has named Sukihiro, and in a single motion ends a life. Then another, then another. By the time the killing stopped, historians estimate this one officer, Captain Gunkichi Tanaka, had personally executed over 300 people with that sword, and for years he walked free. This is the story of how he was finally caught, put on trial in the very city he helped destroy, and executed by firing squad in the mountains of Yuhuatai, and why his story is one of the most disturbing chapters in the history of World War II. Welcome to War Heroes Time Tales. If you're new here, this channel exists to make sure history is never forgotten, no matter how brutal it gets. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we cover here are the ones that don't make it into textbooks, but should. Let's go back to the beginning. The year is 1931. Japan is a nation hungry not for conquest in the poetic sense, but in a coldly industrial one. The Japanese home islands had almost no natural resources. No oil, no coal, no rubber, no iron ore. For a nation racing to industrialize and compete with Western powers, this was a critical weakness. Manchuria, the mineral-rich, industrially vital northeastern region of China, was the solution. On September 18, 1931, Japanese military operatives planted a small explosive charge on a stretch of railway track near the city of Mukden, a line owned by Japan's own South Manchuria Railroad. The blast was minor, it barely damaged the tracks. But that was the point. It wasn't meant to destroy a railway, it was meant to manufacture a reason for war. Within hours, Japanese troops launched a rapid military seizure of Mukden. By February 27, 1932, all of Manchuria had fallen. The Japanese then formalized their occupation by establishing a puppet state called Manchukuo, placing the last Qing Emperor Puyi on a hollow throne while Japanese generals held the real power. The League of Nations condemned the invasion. Japan's response? They walked out of the League entirely. This moment, the Mukden incident, is one of the most consequential staged provocations in modern history. It revealed a pattern that Japan would repeat over the next decade. Manufacture a justification, move fast, and confront the world with a fait accompli. For the next 6 years, armed clashes between Japan and China continued to simmer, what Japanese commanders coldly referred to as incidents. Controlled, but persistent. Then came the night that changed everything. July 7, 1937. A small Japanese unit conducting night maneuvers near the Marco Polo Bridge, just southwest of Beijing, claimed one of their soldiers was missing. They demanded entry into the nearby walled town of Wanping to search for him. The Chinese garrison refused. A shot rang out in the darkness. To this day, no one definitively knows who fired it. But within hours, both sides were exchanging fire, and within weeks, both governments had committed major forces. The soldier, by the way, returned to his unit on his own. He had simply wandered off. It didn't matter. The war had already started. The Marco Polo Bridge incident officially launched the Second Sino-Japanese War, a conflict that would last 8 years, kill an estimated 15 to 20 million Chinese civilians and soldiers, and ultimately merge into the broader catastrophe of World War II. Within weeks, Japanese forces drove south and west, striking with terrifying speed and coordination. Beijing fell. Then Shanghai, in one of the bloodiest urban battles of the entire war. The Battle of Shanghai lasted from August 13 to November 26, 1937. It involved nearly 1 million troops from both sides and became known as the Stalingrad on the Yangtze, a brutal, grinding, house-to-house bloodbath fought in the streets, alleys, and ruins of one of Asia's most modern cities. This is where we first encounter Gunkichi Tanaka. Born March 19, 1905 in Tokyo, Tanaka was the product of Japan's elite military education system. He attended military preparatory schools before graduating from the Imperial Japanese Army Academy, the country's premier officer training institution. His curriculum covered college-level academics, traditional martial arts, horsemanship, and years of regimental training before he was commissioned as a second lieutenant. By the time war with China escalated into full-scale conflict, Tanaka was a seasoned company commander in the 6th Division's 40th Regiment, one of the most battle-hardened units in the Japanese Army. At Shanghai, his regiment fought through 3 brutal stages of combat. The initial Chinese attempt to destroy Japanese presence in the city's downtown, the Japanese amphibious landings and grinding street-by-street urban warfare, and finally the forced retreat of Chinese forces toward their capital, Nanjing. Shanghai fell, and the Japanese generals set their sights 300 kilometers to the west. Japanese General Iwane Matsui was obsessed with capturing Nanjing. He believed, and stated openly, that taking China's capital would break the Chinese government entirely and end the war. He drove his forces toward the city with relentless urgency. As Japanese columns advanced from Shanghai toward Nanjing, the atrocities began before they even reached the city walls. Perhaps the most infamous early incident was a killing contest reported live. Yes, live in the Tokyo newspaper Nichi Nichi Shimbun. Two Japanese officers, Toshiaki Mukai and Tsuyoshi Noda, made a wager. Who could be the first to kill 100 people using only a sword? The newspaper covered the contest like a sports match, running regular score updates over multiple days. Let that sink in, a major national newspaper running kill scores as entertainment. By December 9, 1937, Japanese forces had broken through the last Chinese defensive lines and surrounded Nanjing. General Matsui dropped leaflets over the city, offering surrender within 24 hours and promising no mercy if the offer was refused. No surrender came. On December 10, Matsui ordered the assault. On December 12, under crushing artillery fire and aerial bombardment, Chinese General Tang Shengqi, the same commander who had publicly vowed to defend Nanjing to the death, quietly ordered his men to retreat. What followed was chaos. Chinese soldiers stripped clothing from civilians to blend in. Others were shot by their own supervisory units as they tried to flee. On December 13, the 6th and 116th Divisions entered a broken city facing almost no resistance. And then the massacre began. What happened in Nanjing over the next 6 weeks is one of the most thoroughly documented and most horrifying war crimes of the 20th century. Japanese troops hunted down suspected Chinese soldiers, rounding up thousands of young men who were marched to the banks of the Yangtze River and machine-gunned into the water. Others were buried alive, used for bayonet practice, burned with gasoline, or beheaded. Entire neighborhoods were set on fire. 1/3 of the city was destroyed by arson alone. The death toll is still debated by historians, but estimates range from 200,000 to 300,000 dead over a period of 2 months. Civilians and unarmed soldiers alike. Captain Gunkichi Tanaka was in the middle of all of it. Armed with his personally named sword, Tsukahiro, Tanaka personally executed over 300 prisoners of war and civilians. Many were beheaded. His actions were so extreme that he was celebrated in a Japanese propaganda book called Imperial Soldiers by author Yamanaka Minataro, which depicted him as a heroic warrior and included a photograph of Tanaka in Nanjing mid-swing in the act of decapitating a civilian with Tsukahiro. He wasn't hiding what he did. It was being published in books. Between 20,000 and 80,000 women and girls were raped during the massacre. The crimes were systematic. Soldiers moved door to door. Women who survived the initial assault were often mutilated or killed afterward. Former Japanese soldier Shiro Azuma later admitted in an interview, "It would be all right if we only raped them." Shouldn't say all right, but we always stabbed and killed them, because dead bodies don't talk. A group of foreigners in Nanjing, including German businessman and Nazi Party member John Rabe, established the Nanjing Safety Zone, a protected area that sheltered approximately 250,000 civilians from the slaughter. Rabe used his Nazi Party membership card as leverage against the Japanese, who were cautious about antagonizing Germany. It was an unlikely act of humanity in the middle of hell, and it saved 250,000 lives. The violence slowly subsided in February 1938, but the dead were already numbered in the hundreds of thousands. After Japan's surrender on September 2, 1945, the reckoning began. Gunkichi Tanaka was not initially included on the list of war criminals being sought for the rape of Nanjing. He may have believed he had escaped justice entirely. He was wrong. In April 1947, the Chinese delegation in Japan formally requested Tanaka's extradition to face war crimes charges. On May 14, 1947, the request was approved. 4 days later, Tanaka was extradited to Shanghai and moved to a detention center before being transferred to Nanjing, the city where his crimes had been committed, on May 22. On December 12, 1947, almost exactly 10 years after the massacre began, the Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal opened Tanaka's public trial. His case was combined with those of Mukai and Noda, the infamous killing contest officers. Tanaka refused to confess to any charge. When confronted with the photograph from the propaganda book, the image of him decapitating a civilian with Tsukahiro, Tanaka argued that the victims in the photo were wearing short sleeves, and since the massacre occurred in winter, the photo couldn't have been taken during the Nanjing events. The prosecutor's response was devastating in its simplicity. It is entirely possible to remove a jacket while committing brutal acts. Tanaka's courtroom statement was defiant. He acknowledged being part of Lieutenant General Tani Hisao's unit, but denied any involvement in the massacre. He called the book's account of him killing 300 people propaganda and the imagination of an author. He invoked heaven and earth as his witnesses. The tribunal was not moved. On January 28, 1948, Gunkichi Tanaka, Toshiaki Mukai, and Tsuyoshi Noda were transported to the mountains of the Yuhuatai district outside Nanjing. Mukai and Noda were 35 years old. Tanaka was 42. All three were executed by firing squad. No tears were shed, no appeals were filed that mattered. The sword named Tsukiro could no longer protect its owner. Justice, slow, imperfect, and overdue, had arrived in the same city where Tanaka's crimes had stained history forever. The Nanjing massacre is one of the most documented atrocities of World War II and one of the least discussed in Western education. Over 300,000 people were killed in 2 months. 250,000 were saved by a German businessman with a Nazi party card. And the men responsible, like Tanaka, spent years believing they had gotten away with it. They hadn't. This is exactly why channels like War Heroes Time Tales exist, to make sure these stories are never buried, never sanitized, and never forgotten. If this video opened your eyes, hit that like button right now. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to War Heroes Time Tales and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. Did you know about the Nanjing massacre before today? Let us know. We'll see you in the next one.